They called it mercy, but it was nothing more than abandonment. The council of her people gathered in the cold chambers of stone and steel, their verdict spoken without hesitation. She had been a child of promise, chosen for enhancement, selected to embody the strength of their war-born race. The procedure failed. The damage to her body was irreversible. The spinal collapse left her unable to stand, unable to fight, unable to fulfill the only purpose her kind respected. In their eyes, she had no value. The ships were preparing to leave the colony, their resources stretched thin from endless conflict. Keeping her alive meant carrying dead weight. They forsook her, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with the same tone they would discard a broken blade. She begged in silence, her voice too weak to sway their judgment. When the engines ignited and the fleet began to rise, she knew what their decision truly meant. The chamber emptied, her guardians gone, her family nowhere to be seen. She was left behind in a forgotten outpost on a half-barren world. She pressed her hands against the dirt floor, dragging herself forward as the sky burned with light. The roar of departure thundered across the valley until it faded into silence. She lay still, dust clinging to her skin, her chest heaving in shallow breaths. In that silence, the truth cut deeper than her paralysis. She was not one of them anymore. The colony was nothing but decaying structures and forgotten machines. Wind howled through cracked windows. Supplies were minimal, scraps left behind by those who had decided she was unworthy of carrying. She searched the empty halls for food, crawling inch by inch, dragging her broken body across cold stone until her arms trembled from exhaustion. Hunger gnawed at her. Thirst burned in her throat. She whispered to herself to stay awake, but there were times she wished the darkness would take her quickly. She had been trained from birth to honor strength, to despise weakness. Now every breath felt like betrayal to her people's ideals. At night, the stars shone above the dead colony, sharp and indifferent. She remembered lessons about them, routes of conquest, battlegrounds of ancient wars. Her kind sought dominion among those lights. To her, they were nothing but unreachable fires, distant and cruel. She wondered if her people thought of her at all as they sailed through the void. Did they remember her name? Or was she already erased, a failed experiment, a liability they could not afford to pity? Yet, even in despair, something kept her alive. It was not hope for their return. She knew they would never come back for her. It was something quieter, deeper, a refusal to let their judgment be the end of her story. When her arms gave out, she clawed the ground with her fingers. When hunger weakened her, she scavenged until she found crumbs of dried rations, swallowing them like treasure. She drank from rusted pipes, coughed up metal-tasting water, and carried on. Each act of survival was rebellion against the fate they forced on her. They had forsaken her, but she refused to vanish. Days blurred into weeks. Her skin thinned, her muscles wasted. She listened to her own breathing in the silence, each inhale and exhale a fragile victory. She thought often of death, yet even then, the thought of giving her people what they wanted, a quiet end, filled her with defiance. They had taken her future, but they would not take her will. In her loneliness, she began to speak aloud, telling the empty colony what she remembered of songs, of stories, of promises her parents once made. She recited them like prayers, not because she believed, but because words were the only company she had left. Her mind sharpened in solitude. Where once she measured herself by strength of body, she now measured herself by endurance of spirit. But though she endured, despair remained her shadow. She longed for a hand to reach out, for a voice to remind her she was not nothing. She dreamed of warmth and woke only to the cold bite of reality. Some nights, she cursed herself for still hoping. Other nights, she wept silently, afraid even the empty air would hear her shame. The world around her was merciless, yet no more merciless than the people who had left her behind. Her species had chosen survival over compassion. They believed strength came only from dominance, from perfection. And in their eyes, her broken body was proof she could never belong. They had cast her aside, as though she were an inconvenience, a blemish. Yet the cruelty of that truth carved into her something unexpected. A clarity. If she was to live, it would not be by their standards. It would not be because they deemed her worthy. She would live because she chose to, because she refused to vanish in the silence they had condemned her to. The winds of the colony shifted one evening, dust sweeping across the abandoned streets. She watched from a broken doorway as shadows stretched long across the earth. For the first time since her people left, she felt something stir within her chest. It was not hope, not yet, but a sense that the story was not over. She could not name it, but it pulsed through her veins with the faint rhythm of survival. The night sky flared with distant lights, brighter than usual, and she wondered if they were ships, or simply the stars playing tricks on her eyes. Whatever they were, she whispered to herself that she would see another day, that she would not end here, alone, in the ruins of abandonment. Her people had forsaken her, but the universe was vast. Somewhere out there, she thought there had to be something different, something more. She had no idea how soon that something would come, nor that it would arrive not in the form of her kind, but from the hands of a stranger who carried no resemblance to her people at all. The day he arrived, she thought the end had come. The distant roar of engines reached her ears, and panic seized her chest. Her people had returned, she believed, not for her sake, but to erase what they had left behind. She pulled herself back into the shadows, trembling, afraid that discovery would mean death. Yet when the figure appeared in the broken courtyard, she saw immediately that he was not one of them. His frame was different, his movements unrefined, his eyes alive with something she had not seen in a long time, curiosity, not contempt. He was human. She had heard stories of them, a species considered weak, fragile, unsophisticated compared to her own. Her people dismissed them as primitives who survived only by chance. But the man who entered the colony was no accident. His steps carried purpose, though his equipment looked worn, salvaged, as if he had endured many trials before reaching this place. He paused when he saw her, and in that pause she prepared herself for the same coldness she knew so well. Instead, he lowered his tools, raised his hands in peace, and spoke words she could not understand but whose tone carried no malice. Her instinct was to recoil, to expect cruelty, but his face carried no scorn. He offered water. She resisted at first, pride whispering that she would not accept pity, yet her body betrayed her hunger and thirst. When the liquid touched her lips, relief spread through her like fire in frozen veins. She wanted to look away, ashamed, but he simply smiled, as if the act cost him nothing. That was the first difference she noticed. He gave without calculation. The days that followed blurred together. He scavenged through the ruins, collecting scraps of metal and circuits, muttering to himself in a language she did not know. At times he tried speaking to her, simple words repeated until meaning formed. She began to understand fragments. He asked her name. She gave it, hesitantly, as though expecting him to discard it. Instead, he repeated it back, clumsy on his tongue yet sincere, as if he treasured the sound. His kindness unsettled her. No one of her people had ever spoken to her with such warmth since the day of her failure. She questioned his motives, certain there had to be some hidden demand. But there was none. He returned each day with food, patched her clothing, and began shaping tools from the wreckage. She watched as his hands worked tirelessly, guided not by advanced machinery, but by determination and creativity. Her people had access to wonders of science, yet they had not spared a moment to ease her suffering. This man, with nothing but scraps, sought to give her back what she had lost. At night, when the winds howled, he lit small fires and gestured for her to sit closer. She hesitated, wary of closeness, but the warmth drew her in. He spoke of stars, pointing upward, his words half incomprehensible, yet filled with reverence. Unlike her people, who saw the cosmos as territories to conquer, he seemed to see them as mysteries to admire. She listened, and though she could not follow every word, she understood enough. He saw beauty where others saw only resources. One morning, He carried to her a strange contraption, metal frames, wires, straps fashioned with care. He gestured eagerly, urging her to let him try. She resisted, shame burning in her chest, afraid to be humiliated again. But his insistence was not forceful, only patient. Finally, she agreed. He placed the device around her, adjusted it carefully, and supported her as she leaned forward. For the first time since her paralysis, she rose a few inches from the ground. Her breath caught in her throat. Tears blurred her vision. She collapsed quickly, her strength not yet ready, but the moment shattered years of despair. She saw possibility where before there had been only failure. The human did not celebrate his success for himself. Instead, he cheered for her, speaking her name like victory. His joy was not pride in invention, but joy in seeing her lifted, even for a moment. She lay back exhausted, but a new warmth settled in her chest, something fragile and frightening. It had been so long since anyone had wanted her to succeed for her own sake. In the days that followed, he refined his creation. Piece by piece, he rebuilt, corrected, strengthened. She tested it, her body aching with effort, but each attempt brought her further than the last. The exosuit grew sturdier, and so did she. With each step, her trust in him deepened.
Trust was dangerous, she knew that.
Yet when she looked at him, bent over his work with sweat on his brow and determination in his eyes, she could not deny that he was unlike any she had ever known. Their conversations grew richer as she learned his words, and he learned hers. He asked about her past, and though she spoke with bitterness, he listened without judgment. When she confessed that her people had abandoned her, his expression darkened, not with superiority, but with anger at injustice. He could not understand how they could forsake their own. She tried to explain their logic, their obsession with strength, but he shook his head, rejecting it utterly. To him, life itself was worth protecting, broken or not. In his presence, she began to laugh again, soft at first, then freer, a sound she thought she had lost forever. He told her stories of humanity, tales of persistence, of ordinary men and women overcoming impossible odds not with perfection but with stubborn will. She listened, and though their worlds were galaxies apart, something in those stories resonated with her. Perhaps weakness was not a curse. Perhaps imperfection was not failure. Perhaps survival itself was victory. The nights grew shorter as her body strengthened. She could stand for brief moments with his help, walk a few steps with the exosuit. The hopeless child abandoned to die was slowly transforming into someone new. Not because her body was whole, but because someone saw her worth beyond it. And though she had not yet spoken the words aloud, she felt the truth forming inside her. What her people had denied her, this human had given freely: dignity, compassion, and the spark of belonging. The day she walked unaided was the day her world changed. The exosuit, crude in design but precise in purpose, locked around her frame with gentle strength. The human adjusted straps and circuits with careful hands, and when she placed her foot forward, the machine answered. For the first time since her body failed her, she rose and remained standing. Air caught in her chest, and her legs trembled, but they carried her weight. She moved one step, then another, each motion burning with both pain and triumph. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing, not from weakness, but from the flood of freedom she thought forever lost. He held her, not as a savior, but as a companion sharing her victory. Her people had considered her body ruined, unworthy of saving. Yet this man, with scraps and stubborn resolve, restored more than motion. He restored choice. Each step was proof that worth was not measured by perfection, but by perseverance. She looked at him then, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude deeper than words, admiration that lingered beyond survival. Day after day, she trained in the suit. The human guided her movements, encouraged her when her body faltered, adjusted the device with endless patience. He never mocked her stumbles, never treated failure as shame. To him, each failure was only another step toward strength. Slowly, she believed it too. Her arms gained steadiness, her back no longer shook with every attempt. She could walk short distances without falling. She could stand tall beneath the stars, feeling the wind on her face not from the ground but from a height she once thought forever denied. Their bond grew in these quiet victories. Around the fire, he spoke of his home, vast oceans, forests, cities that pulsed with life. She imagined them, distant and unreachable, yet real because of the passion in his voice. He described storms that tested ships, mountains climbed by sheer will, explorers who ventured beyond the known not because they were the strongest, but because they dared. To her, each story was more than memory. It was a lesson. Humanity was not defined by perfection of body, but by refusal to yield. She began sharing her own stories. Memories of her people's training halls, the cold doctrine drilled into every child, strength above all, weakness to be cold. Speaking the words aloud, she heard the cruelty in them as though for the first time. The human listened, frowning, shaking his head. He told her she was not weak, that survival against abandonment was strength her people would never understand. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. The nights grew warmer in his company. Laughter returned, cautious but real. She teased his clumsy attempts at her language, while he celebrated every word she learned of his. The silence that once suffocated her now felt alive, filled with companionship. She realized one evening, as he worked by firelight adjusting the exosuit, that she no longer feared sleep. Where once she dreaded waking to loneliness, now she closed her eyes knowing someone would still be there when she opened them. But with joy came fear. She knew her people's ways. If they discovered her survival, they would not accept what she had become. They would call her tainted, corrupted by human hands. Worse, they would see him as a threat, an intruder who had defied their judgment. She dreamed of ships returning, of voices demanding her obedience, of being torn from the only person who had ever treated her as more than a failure. These fears shadowed her happiness, but she kept them hidden, unwilling to stain their fragile peace. The human, though, sensed her unease. One night, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder, meeting her eyes with quiet certainty. He promised that whatever came, she would not face it alone. His words were simple, but they struck deeper than any oath she had known. Alone, she had been forsaken. With him, she felt unbreakable. Her progress with the exosuit became more than recovery, it became transformation. She no longer saw herself as the broken child left to die, but as someone reborn through resilience. She began to walk without hesitation, to stand without fear. The world that once caged her now opened, each step carving new ground. The human celebrated not only her strides, but her spirit. He called her strong, and though she had never believed such a word could belong to her, she began to wear it with pride. Love came quietly, without declaration, woven into gestures. The way he steadied her when she faltered, the way she leaned closer to listen to his stories, the way their laughter blended into the night. It was not sudden but steady, built brick by brick with trust and kindness. She realized she cherished him not merely for saving her, but for seeing her when no one else ever had. And though he said little of his own feelings, his eyes lingered on her not with pity, but with respect. Respect had always been denied her. Now it was given freely. One evening, standing at the edge of the colony ruins, she gazed at the horizon where the sun bled into the sky. Beside her, the human watched in silence. She whispered that she was not afraid anymore.
He asked why.
She answered simply, because he had shown her that fear did not define her, that even the forsaken could rise again. He smiled, and in that smile she felt belonging more powerful than any bond of blood or heritage. But peace is fragile. On the wind, whispers carried of ships moving through nearby sectors. The human had intercepted faint signals, broken transmissions hinting at her people's presence. She felt the old dread return, coiling in her chest like a serpent. She remembered the cold judgment in their eyes, the way they had turned their backs without hesitation. If they found her now, standing tall in a suit built by human hands, She knew they would not celebrate her survival. They would condemn it. Yet as the fear grew, so did her resolve. She looked at the man beside her, the one who had given her strength, and she knew she could not let them take it from her. Whatever storm approached, she would face it not as the broken child they abandoned, but as the woman reborn in defiance. And at her side would stand the human who had given her more than life. He had given her hope. The sky split with fire when the ships returned. She knew their silhouettes instantly, sharp-edged vessels that had once filled her with awe. Now, they filled her with dread. Engines thundered as they descended, casting shadows across the colony's ruins. The human stood beside her, jaw set, tools abandoned at his feet. She felt her body tremble, not from weakness, but from memory. Every scar of abandonment clawed its way back to the surface. The first soldiers to emerge wore the same armor she once admired. Their eyes swept the ruins until they found her. Shock rippled through them, shock that she lived, that she stood upright, that she had endured. They spoke her name, not with affection but with disbelief. They called her anomaly, failure, aberration. Then their gaze shifted to the human, and disgust hardened into open contempt. He was unworthy, they said, an intruder who had tainted her with his presence. They demanded her return. Their voices carried authority sharpened by years of unquestioned obedience. She felt the weight of it pressing down, commanding her to surrender, to obey, to crawl back into chains she had long since broken. But the human stepped forward, placing himself between her and them. His words were simple, but his voice cut through the air like steel. She was not theirs anymore. The soldiers laughed at his defiance. To them, he was fragile, soft, a creature of no consequence. But he did not flinch. He stood taller, unarmed yet unyielding. His courage was not born of power but of conviction, and in that moment, she saw the truth of what set him apart. Her people measured worth in domination, but he measured worth in love. They tried to coax her, promising reinstatement, forgiveness, even honor if she left the human behind. The offers dripped with lies, but once, she might have accepted them, desperate for belonging. Not now. Now, she saw the hollowness of their words. They had abandoned her when she was helpless, discarded her like broken stone. It was this human, with nothing but resolve, who had given her life back. No promise of status could erase that truth. Her choice formed not in hesitation but in clarity. She stepped forward, her exosuit humming softly, her body trembling with strength rebuilt through struggle. She looked at her people, then at the man beside her. Her voice rose steady and sharp, carrying through the wind. She told them she was not theirs to claim. She told them she had found more strength in the arms of one human than in the entire weight of their empire. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hiss of their weapons powering up. Rage burned in their eyes, yet beneath it, fear flickered. They had cast her aside believing she would vanish, but she had returned not as a failure, but as proof of their blindness. She had survived without them, and worse, she had found dignity beyond their reach. That truth was a wound they could not heal. One soldier stepped forward, demanding obedience, threatening force. She did not falter. She raised her head higher and declared that they no longer had any hold over her. Her life was hers to claim. Her people had measured her worth and found her lacking, but humanity had measured her differently. Not by strength, not by perfection, but by the will to endure and the courage to care. The human remained silent now, letting her voice carry. His hand brushed hers briefly, a touch not of possession but of solidarity. She felt fire burn in her chest, a defiance so bright it swallowed every shadow. She turned her back on the soldiers, stepping closer to him, a gesture more final than any weapon could be. In that single step, she chose her future. The soldiers spat curses, their fury echoing against the ruins. They threatened destruction, but even they seemed hesitant. To take her by force would be to admit weakness, to reveal that they had been wrong to forsake her. Their pride shackled them, and pride was all they had left. With venom in their voices, they turned, retreating to their ships. Engines flared, fire streaked across the sky, and soon the colony was silent once more. She stood shaking, not from fear, but from release. The weight of years lifted from her shoulders, replaced by something new: freedom. She looked at the human, her rescuer, her companion, her unexpected salvation. His eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. Neither spoke for a moment, because words could not hold the fullness of what had passed between them. At last, she whispered that she was no longer forsaken. He smiled, a simple curve of lips, but in that smile was every promise she had ever longed for. Together they turned toward the horizon, where the stars burned bright and infinite. No longer cold fires of conquest, they were now beacons of possibility. She had been abandoned by her own kind, but in the embrace of one human, she had found more than survival. She had found love, and through that love, she had found herself. The ruins stood behind them, reminders of cruelty and loss, but they no longer defined her. Ahead lay a future unwritten, fragile but real. And with each step she took, supported not by the exosuit alone but by the bond they shared, she felt certain that humanity's gift was greater than any empire. Compassion had triumphed where power had failed. Her people had forsaken her, but in their failure, she discovered a truth stronger than any weapon. The strength of humanity was not in conquest but in care, not in perfection but in persistence, not in domination but in love. And as she walked beside him into the vast unknown, she carried that truth as her new destiny.